She will never amount to anything.
A 10-year-old girl sat in the corner of a room while her family ate dinner without her. No place set at the table. No chair pulled up. No one who noticed. Her aunt looked at her from across the room and said to the person beside her loud enough to carry, "She will never amount to anything." The girl heard it. She turned the page of her book and kept reading. Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. And if you are not yet subscribed to Turning Point Tales, hit that subscribe button. This story is only getting started. 30 years later, that same aunt would sit in an auditorium with 3,000 other people and rise to her feet and crying because the woman on that stage, in her wheelchair, had just changed the world. And the aunt finally understood what she had been looking at all along. Her name was Grace Mensa. She was 10 years old when a car accident took the use of her legs. One afternoon, coming home from school, a driver who ran a red light. The doctors were kind when they said it. They used careful words. Grace's mother, Dorothy, sat in that hospital room and held her daughter's hand without letting go for 6 hours straight. Grace looked at the ceiling. She was not crying. She was thinking. She was already that kind of child. The kind who processes before they react. Quiet, observant, always 3 thoughts ahead of the conversation happening around her. The accident did not change that. It changed everything else. The family gathered, as families do when something goes wrong, full of noise and concern and food and opinions nobody asked for. Aunt Patricia arrived on the 3rd day. She walked into Grace's hospital room, looked at her niece in the bed, looked at Dorothy, then said, in the voice of someone delivering obvious facts, "Children like this need special schools, special care. This is going to cost money you do not have." Dorothy said nothing. Aunt Patricia said, "You need to think realistically, Dorothy. This child is going to be a burden." Dorothy looked at her sister, said, "You can leave now." Aunt Patricia left, but the words stayed, the way those words always stay. Grace's father, Joseph, had a harder time with it, not because he did not love his daughter. He did. But Joseph was a man who had built his identity around being a provider, around fixing things, around having answers. And this, he could not fix. He started working longer hours, came home later, sat at the far end of the table at dinner. Grace noticed. She did not say anything. She turned the page of her book and kept reading. What the family saw: a wheelchair, medical bills, a future that looked limited, a burden. What they did not see was a 10-year-old girl reading 3 books a week because her legs would not carry her, but nothing had touched her mind. A girl who asked her mother for a notebook and filled it in 2 weeks, filled another one in 10 days, then another. A girl who listened to everything, absorbed everything, filed everything away. Grace Mensa's brain worked like a machine that had been handed more fuel than it knew what to do with. She could not run to the playground, so she went somewhere else instead. Inside books, inside language, inside the particular world of someone who pays very close attention to how words land on people. By 12, she had read more than anyone in her class. By 13, her English teacher, who was the first adult outside her mother to actually look at her, wrote on an essay, "This is not the work of a student. This is the work of a writer." Grace read that comment 7 times. Then she wrote the next essay, twice as long. Family gatherings were the hardest. Not because of Aunt Patricia. Grace had processed Patricia a long time ago. The hardest part was her cousin Kevin. Kevin was 14 when Grace was 12. Loud, popular. The kind of teenager who performed for whatever audience was available. At a Christmas gathering, he walked past her with a group of friends, said, without breaking stride, "Watch out for the wheelchair." His friends laughed. Grace looked at him. She said nothing, but she wrote about it that evening. 3 pages. Not angry pages, honest ones. She wrote about what it felt like to be the thing in the room that people stepped around, spoke past, planned without. She wrote it so clearly that her mother, who found it while putting away laundry, sat on the bed and could not move for 10 minutes. Dorothy brought her daughter a cup of tea, sat beside her, said, "Your words do something to people, Grace." Grace said, "What do they do?" Dorothy said, "They make them feel less alone." That sentence, that one sentence from her mother in a small bedroom on a Tuesday evening, changed the direction of everything. At 16, Grace entered a school essay competition. Her teacher, Dr. Adaiz, the only teacher who had ever actually read her work, submitted Grace's essay without telling her. The competition was open to the whole district. 400 entries. Grace's essay was titled, "The View from Down Here." It was about what the world looks like when everyone is standing and you are not. It won, not second place. Off first. Dr. Adaiz told her on a Thursday morning before the first class. Grace looked at her, said, "Are you sure?" Dr. Adaiz said, "The judges said they had never read anything like it." Grace said, "I have a few more I could show them." Dr. Adaiz laughed. That was the beginning. More competitions, more wins. A local newspaper published one of her pieces when she was 17. Letters came in from readers, more than 30 letters, from people who had read her words and felt something shift. One letter was from a woman in her 50s who had been disabled since she was 19. She wrote, "You said what I have been trying to say for 30 years. Thank you." Grace kept that letter. She still has it. At 22, Grace started posting online. Not performance, not content, not a brand, just her thoughts, her honest ones. Written the way she always wrote, directly, clearly, with nothing wasted. The first post got 12 responses. The second got 40. By the end of the month, she had people from 4 different countries writing to her. She was not trying to build an audience. She was trying to say true things and see who needed to hear them. As it turned out, many people needed to hear them. She wrote about disability without bitterness, about exclusion without rage, about what it means to live in a body the world was not designed for, and to build your life anyway. She wrote for the people who had been told they would not amount to anything. Not just disabled people. Anyone who had been dismissed. Anyone who had been spoken past. Anyone who had been the one in the corner with the book on their lap while everyone else sat at the table. They found her in their thousands. At 28, Grace Mensa started a foundation, Grace Forward. Its focus was simple: children with disabilities, access to education, access to language, access to the belief that their life was not smaller because their body was different. She funded it herself, from speaking fees she had been collecting for 3 years. Small events at first, community centers, schools, a church hall where 80 people sat and nobody checked their phones for an hour because Grace Mensa was speaking. Word moved, as it does when something is true. Larger stages, larger audiences, international invitations. By 32, she had spoken in 14 countries. By 35, she had directly changed the education access of over 9,000 disabled children through the Foundation's programs. 9,000. While Aunt Patricia had called her a burden, while Kevin had told his friends to watch out for the wheelchair, while her father had sat at the far end of the table, Grace Mensa had been quietly building the largest disabled youth advocacy platform on the continent. Nobody in her family knew. She had not told them, not out of secrecy. She had simply been too busy. Right now, if you have not subscribed to Turning Point Tales yet, hit that subscribe button. Stay with us. The most powerful moment in this story is still 2 minutes away. The annual Global Humanity Awards, 3,000 guests, the most important gathering of philanthropists, advocates, and changemakers in the world. Grace had been asked to give the keynote address. Her team handled the invitations. Her mother, Dorothy, was in the front row. She had been in the front row at every single event for 20 years, but Grace had asked her team to quietly extend invitations to several members of her family, not to embarrass them, not to watch their faces. She wanted them there. She had always wanted them there. That had never changed. Aunt Patricia came. She had received an invitation with a car and hotel and had assumed it was some kind of charity event. She had told her daughter, "Might as well go. It is free." Kevin came. He was 38 now. He had a family. He had grown into a quieter version of himself. Her father, Joseph, came. He had been trying for 3 years to rebuild something with Grace. She had been patient with him, slow, careful, the way she was with anything important. He sat in the 4th row, his hands in his lap, his eyes at the stage. The lights dimmed. 3,000 people went quiet. The announcer's voice came over the speakers. She said, "Tonight's keynote speaker has been described by world leaders as a voice that changes rooms, by educators as the person who gave their students permission to exist fully, by the 9,000 young people whose lives her foundation has directly transformed, as the reason they believed they had a future." She said she began her journey in a small room with a book on her lap and a notebook she filled in 2 weeks. Aunt Patricia sat up in her seat. Something was familiar. The announcer said, "Please welcome the founder of Grace Forward and tonight's recipient of the Global Humanity Award." She paused. Grace Mensa. A wheelchair appeared from the side of the stage. The woman in it was 40 years old, composed, warm, present. The auditorium rose. All 3,000 people, rising. Not because they were told to, because they could not stay seated. Aunt Patricia stood up. Her hands went to her mouth. She looked at the woman on the stage, the 10-year-old girl from the corner of the room, the one she had called a burden, the one she had said would never amount to anything. Standing ovation. 3,000 people. For the woman in the wheelchair. Kevin stood beside his aunt. His face doing something he had not let it do in a very long time. Her father, Joseph. 4th row, hands no longer in his lap. Raised, clapping, crying. The specific crying of a man who finally understands the cost of the distance he kept. Dorothy watched from the front row. She did not clap. She just looked at her daughter the way she had looked at her in that hospital room 30 years ago. Like she always knew. Grace took the microphone, looked at the room, took her time, then said, "There was a time when people believed my life had ended." She paused, but God had only just begun. The room went very still. She spoke for 22 minutes. She did not talk about the people who doubted her. She did not name the aunt. She did not mention the cousin. She did not describe the empty chair at the dinner table. She talked about the children, the 9,000. She talked about what access means, what visibility means, what it costs a child to grow up believing they are a burden, and what it gives a child to have one person, just one, who reads their essay, who says, "This is not the work of a student," who brings them tea and says, "Your words make people feel less alone." At the end, she said, "I was told I would never amount to anything." She looked at the room. I spent 30 years becoming the answer to that sentence. Not for them. For For every child who is sitting in a corner right now with a book on their lap, wondering if their life has a point. It does. I promise you, it does. The room rose again. Aunt Patricia found her backstage. Grace saw her coming. She did not stiffen. She did not prepare a speech. Patricia stood in front of her. She said, "I called you a burden." She could not say anything after that. Grace looked at her aunt. The woman was 67 years old, standing in a hallway backstage at the most important night of Grace's life, crying in a way that had no performance in it. Grace reached out, took her aunt's hand, said, "I know you did," said, "and I built everything anyway." She said, "That is not your credit. It is not your blame either." She said, "But you are here now." That matters. Patricia held her niece's hand and could not speak. Her father came next. He stood at a distance first, then stepped forward. He said her name. She said, "Dad." He said, "I did not know how to be who you needed. I know that is not an excuse." Grace said, "It is not?" Then she said, "But I am not carrying it anymore." He nodded. He was crying too. They stayed like that for a moment. Then Grace said, "Come and meet the team." And just like that, she moved forward, the way she always had. Dorothy found her daughter after all the family, when everyone else had gone. She wheeled up beside her, said, "How do you feel?" Grace said, "Like something that started in a small bedroom on a Tuesday evening just got very big." Dorothy smiled, said, "Your words make people feel less alone." Grace looked at her mother. 30 years. Through the accident, through the empty chairs, through the nights she filled notebooks while the rest of the house slept, through competitions and letters in 14 countries and 9,000 children, through every room that rose to its feet and every person who stayed seated. Dorothy had been there every single time. Front row. Grace reached over, took her mother's hand, said nothing. Some things do not need words, not even from a woman whose words had just moved 3,000 people to their feet. Some things are just hands and presence and 30 years of showing up. The burden they said she was had just received a standing ovation from the world, and the only person she wanted to tell was already right beside her, the way she always was. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to Turning Point Tales. We will see you in the next one.